All right, ladies and gentlemen, summer is over and it is fall, and it's time once again for a Las Piedras Railroad podcast. And it is a pleasure to hook up with my dear friend Dave Vollmer, at least an internet web friend from the Railwire forum. And he is a narrow gauge master modeler, and we're going to talk about all of this. And including his published, not only his narrow gauge modeling published, but the Juniata division of the Pennsylvania Railroad, which was published in multiple publications. So we jump right in here and we say, welcome to the podcast, sir.
Hey, thanks. Appreciate it. Thanks for the invite.
All right, so let's talk about your early modeling. What influenced you in your early model railroading?
Oh, gosh. Well, had to be my dad. He's the one who got me into the hobby. He was all into a lot of the Eastern roads, but we took a family trip out to Arizona in 1979. And I was impressed by what I saw out there. So the first train set he got for me for my birthday, I think when I turned 8, was a Bachmann Santa Fe freight set. And so I had an HO set that was meant to look like Arizona in, I don't know what part of Arizona. It was just kind of random. But it was a Santa Fe branch line of some sort. And that's what I did when I was a kid. And then as I got along, we took another trip out to the west in 1988. And that included a trip on the Durango and Silverton. And at that time, I had also I digested all of Malcolm Furlow's stuff and John Olson stuff. And so I started tinkering in HOn3. So my high school years, at least, when I found time to model, I was tinkering actually in HOn3. So that was kind of where I got inspired. And then, of course, growing up riding the Strasburg Railroad and the Pennsylvania Railroad, the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania, I always had an affinity also for the Pennsy.
So what did the prototype narrow gauge railroad haul? What did it really do?
Yeah, so from the Colorado narrow gauge perspective, most of the railroads were built primarily to move minerals. They were built mostly during the silver boom that lasted until 1893, and then there was a secondary gold boom that happened around Cripple Creek in 1899. But the narrow gauge was primarily built for mineral traffic. But as the mineral market is very volatile, most railroads found themselves having to sort of expand their business into sort of all the things we associate railroads moving: passengers, mail, lumber, coal. The railroad I model, the Rio Grande Southern, there was a very prolific coal mine that is actually still in production today. I think it's one of the last operating coal mines left in Colorado. And then you had livestock. There was a lot of sheep and cattle grazing in the high country, and all of those animals needed to be moved down to lower elevation before the snows came. So the railroads were very busy with that as well. So at least as far as the Colorado narrow gauge goes, it was pretty diverse, the traffic. And my railroad didn't connect with a standard gauge railroad, but through the Denver and Rio Grande Western, of course, it connected with its own standard gauge. And so eventually most things that originated on the RGS found its way to the standard gauge.
All right, so we're looking at the layout, and most everybody, if they haven't been under a rock, knows the layout. But here's my question for you. How did you put this all into that small room?
Well, this house was new construction, and we had a design for the basement, and I could probably have taken more space, but I actually kind of wanted to make sure that we could use the basement for other things. For example, the wet bars down there. So when we have our Christmas parties, that's where everybody hangs out, right? So I figured if I confined myself to that 12 by 14 foot alcove, number one, it wouldn't overwhelm the basement. And number two, it wouldn't overwhelm me. It would be something I could build in a reasonable amount of time and be able to detail without going broke, right? So one of the ways that I was able to fit that is by, making sacrifices. And all model railroads are compromises and sacrifices of some sort. But, there were scenes that I might have liked to include that I couldn't. I will say, I do regret that I don't have as much as Ed Kapuscinski on the Railwire would call negative space, which would just be a track wandering through the wilderness, which is what most of the 162 miles of the Rio Grande Southern actually was. So I have some signature scenes, and I had to be very careful about what I chose to fit. It's manageable. I can maintain it. It's something that I was able to complete in just a short period of time. So, again, it's just a matter of, having to make some tough choices about what do I include and what do I have to exclude.
Well, that's the next question. How do you decide what to compress, move, or omit?
So very specifically on the RGS, a lot of modelers, and this is because Banta Model Works offers all the structure kits for Vance Junction. Vance Junction is where the Telluride branch connected to the main line. And so almost every model I've ever seen of the RGS, almost every model I've ever seen of the Colorado Narrow Gauge has Vance Junction. And I'm like, you know what? I don't actually need to do that because I'm not simulating traffic coming off the Telluride branch, which if I were more of an operator and less of a roundy rounder, maybe that would have been important. So I'm like, okay, I don't have to hurt myself trying to fit Vance Junction in there. And, there were some other things in there that I was thinking about, like Dallas Divide, but I was already going to put Lizard Head in there. So I already had one mountain pass already. So it was, it's kind of like, and then the other thing was, what kits and scenes interested me more. A lot of the buildings for the Rio Grande Southern are available commercially. So which kits did I have, which kits had I built, and which ones was I interested in building?
So the scene composition is amazing with the backdrop, the trees, the rugged terrain, the aspen trees. I mean, it looks like high country Colorado.
So I do have to give credit where credit's due. The backdrops, because people always ask about the backdrops. Lark Products, LARC.
Oh yeah.
That's where they're from. And then the trees are mostly commercial trees. I had started by building my own aspen trees using super trees, but the climate out here in Colorado, as you know, being in Arizona, is so dry that those things crumble to dust. So most of the aspen trees come from a company called Grand Central Gems.
Yes, great company.
The trees are a mix of JTT products, Grand Central Gems, and some other trees that I've kind of had for a while, and I no longer remember where they came from. So they're mostly commercial trees. I do tend to paint the coniferous trees to try to have sort of a more realistic color. But other than that, they're pretty much out of the bag.
So you didn't do a Grant Eastman like the Alberta Southern and make hundreds and hundreds of aspen trees.
Oh God, I'd still be making trees, man. I mean, when you're out here in Colorado and you look around, and even with the pine bark beetle killing our forests, when you just see how many trees are in a single field of view, and you're like, oh, if I had to make those from scratch, that's all I'd ever do.
Yeah, and just a patch on like an alluvial fan on the side of a mountain going up, just a patch of trees by themselves. You're right. Okay, so the scenery on the layout has a real sense of place. How do you capture the mood of narrow gauge country, the rugged high country character, which you've done exceptionally well?
Okay, so 2 tips on that. Number 1, I cheated because the ground cover is from the real locations. Right, so
nice.
The backdrops are the real locations, and the ground cover are the real locations. I just took the dirt home and sifted it, and baked it, and did how you usually prepare real dirt.
Right.
So the foreground matches the background by default. So that's how you cheat your way through that. Now I know not everybody can actually go out to where they're modeling and take samples home, but I was fortunate to be able to do that. And then the second tip on that is, most people, when they model things, and this is give me another prop to Ed Kapuscinski, who has often said, hey, we often model what we see other people model instead of modeling the prototype. And so for this layout, I tried to kind of purge my mind, even though I was heavily inspired by lots of really great narrow gauge modelers, try to purge my mind and only focus on the photographs that I took out there, and then try to reproduce what I'd seen. And I went out there to the RGS country the same week that I model, which would have been right around the peak of the fall stock rush. And I noticed how ridiculously green everything still was.
Yes.
You see people model the narrow gauge and it looks like it's all desert, right? That's not what the high country in Colorado looks like. It's very, very green just before the snows, except for Lizard Head was already brown. So my Lizard Head is also brown. So you can actually see sort of the progression of elevation. Ridgeway at the lowest point is very lush and green. You start seeing the leaves change color as you get higher in elevation, and then by the time you get to Lizard Head, everything's already dormant.
Holy galloping goose, Batman. Let's talk about locomotives and rolling stock. Did you like that intro there to this section?
Yeah, I thought about actually sitting and counting all the Blackstone engines I have. I know I have 5 K27s, and I probably have, a dozen of the C19s. We call it crackstone for a reason. And I used to be able to get those things for less than $400 a pop. And of course, you can't do that now. Do have some brass. Let's see, I have a brass RGS 20, RGS 25, and RGS 42. And I just got a hold of one of the C18s that ran out of Ridgeway on the Denver and Rio Grande Western, also brass. That one is awaiting the install of DCC and sound. Everything else is DCC and sound. And then the Galloping Geese, I have 3 of those, and they're from Concord. And they're also all DCC and sound. So that's pretty much the motive power. I do have one of those model die casting 280 kits from the 70s that I also added a Tsunami to Keep Alive and all that good stuff to it. Flush mounted LED headlight, and try to detail it up to look like it could run next to my Blackstones and not be noticed.
All right, so what are some of your methods for weathering narrow gauge equipment, the locomotives and the rolling stock? I would assume that most of that is going to be dust, mud, and grime, and not a lot of rust.
Right. So wooden cars, obviously, you won't see a tremendous amount of rust on them. You will see a lot of rust on the locomotives, particularly around where, the water drips.
Yep.
Particularly around the smoke box front, and then you'll see some rust and scaling on the firebox sides down below the cab. But beyond that, not a lot of rust to be seen. Coupler faces, of course, that's something you should always be, weathering. We often forget to weather our couplers, but the coupler knuckles should be nice and rusty because whatever paint they ever had got knocked off of them. Let's see. I started out with doing a lot of just chalks and washes and airbrush and that sort of thing, but lately I've kind of been really clicking with pan pastels. I finally broke down and bought a couple of those, big sets of they're specifically for weathering pan pastels, and they're not cheap, but they last forever. They give you so much powder. I could custom weather for people for the next 50 years and never use up what I bought. So the pan pastels, I really like the control that you get with them. They have some nice binders in them so that you don't have to use a whole lot of the dull coat or whatever to get it to bind. So I do like that. For the wood, oh gosh, trying to think of like this most succinct way to put it. I use a lot of sort of weathered wood colors, both the Vallejo weathering paints and the craft paints like barnwood color and so on from, you get them at your local, hobby craft store. To try to, simulate rotten, peeling, dry wood and that sort of thing. For rolling stock, like in particular, especially if there's got like an exposed wood look, like inside a gondola car or on a flat car, like to kind of, do individual boards, kind of the way I do the individual ties. Every single tie on my layout is painted individually. So just to give it that sort of that rustic wood, silvered wood that it gets out here in the West, the wood out here tends to dry rather than rot, and it turns kind of this grayish silver. And that's, it's kind of a tough thing to get to, but there's a lot of different, grays and tans that you can use. And then I kind of tend to dry brush everything to kind of blend it all together.
I just saw a Malcolm Furlow video that I think it's really old. Alan Keller put up where he's interviewing them. I mean, they look like they're in the 80s. And he's talking about how to weather wood using the old India ink and alcohol concept.
Oh, yeah. Yep. Yeah, that's funny you mentioned that because I just saw that video posted
you
too.
saw the same one too.
They had that video on VHS when I was a kid because my dad was a model railroader, and
right,
he bought those from Kalmbach when they first came out. I think it was like shortly after we bought our first VCR.
Yeah, don't they get out of the car and walk into his house? And there's old curly-haired Malcolm. Alan Keller and his wife look like they're doing a 1984 Chevy ad.
So, yeah, I know it pretty well. Yeah, and so, for my actual raw wood, I do use the India ink quite a bit. The other thing I use a lot of is Hunter Line. Hunter Line has a lot of great different colors that you can get for some color variation. So for a large wooden structure like the Lizard Head Snow Shed, there's probably about 4 or 5 different stains in there. But sort of the unifying stain throughout all of it is the old alcohol India ink trick.
All right, let's talk about operations, traffic, and industries.
Yes, let's. In the photographs, you're going to see car card and waybill boxes.
Yep.
And I will tell you that most of those cars have not moved in about 5 years. I found that I was actually constructing what was probably too elaborate an operating scheme for a layout as simple as what I've got. So working with Ed, I've kind of come to the conclusion that switch lists are probably as sophisticated as I need to get. Most of the RGS was operated as extras that worked like locals. And so there's really no reason why I should have to worry about doing anything other than a switch list. So now what I'll often do is I'll just have I'll have a cut of cars in the yard. I've got set outs and pickups, and I bring the train down to Rico, and then that's it for a session, or I'll go the other way, right? And that's really all you need to do. In terms of the industries on the railroad, mining, of course, is we think about the Colorado narrow gauge. So we have the big mill at Rico that actually serves most of the mines in the Rico area. And then you've got the aerial tram station at Ophir. Then you've got the uranium ore bin. That's actually vanadium and carnotite at Placerville. It's actually just below Placerville, but on my layout, it's right there. And then there's also a truck dump in Rico where the mines that didn't feed into the Rico Pro Patria mill would just dump their stuff directly into the cars. So that's the big stuff. And then I've got 2 cattle pens. It's the stock fall rush. So I run cattle extras. That's the other thing you'll see that's the closest thing to a unit train you're going to see on the RGS is a solid cattle train. And then the rest are the galloping geese, really. And then if I'm really feeling like having some fun, I'll run a passenger train, ostensibly as the Rocky Mountain Railroad Club special.
Yeah, so an engine, 2 tank cars, 2 stock cars, and a hack. There you go, right?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much, which is great because those little Blackstone C19s, they don't pull that much, but the K27s can pull pretty well.
So the RGS and other narrow gauge railroads in Colorado had the alphabet and then the number for the classification of locomotives. And why did standard gauge have 462 or 040? It's based on their wheel arrangement, but what were the designations for narrow gauge locomotives, and how did they come up with those?
C19, C17, C19. Yeah. Oh gosh, I didn't do my homework here.
That's okay.
I want to say it's related to the tractive effort.
Oh, okay.
It's either related to the tractive effort or the locomotive's weight.
Okay.
Because and originally the Rio Grande used one, and then they started using the other. So like a Class 60 became a C16. And I'm trying to remember if it's tractive effort or weight. But
and this was
related to that. And that's specifically the Denver and Rio Grande Western's classification system, which the RGS used because the RGS was always sort of the bastard stepchild.
Right. So what other narrow gauge railroads, just to jump to narrow gauge railroads that operated like Ma and Pa and stuff, did they do the same thing?
Oh, I don't think so. The Ma and Pa is an interesting animal because it was originally built as narrow gauge and then later standard gauge, which is why it had ridiculously sharp curves for a standard gauge railroad. The East Broad Top, for example, I don't know that they classified their engines at all. They just gave them road numbers, and that was that. I know there was a very convoluted classification system that Colorado and Southern used, and I don't exactly know enough about the CNS to tell you exactly how that went. But there was the B4E or something like that. I don't know what all that meant. The RGS did actually purchase one ex-Colorado and Southern engine, number 74, that still exists today at the Railroad Museum up there in Golden.
Do you think narrow gauge modeling appeals to a different type of model railroader?
Quite possibly. Now, so there's narrow gauge railroading the way I do it, and then there's narrow gauge railroading like you might see. So I think there's two schools of narrow gauge railroads, right? There's sort of the whimsical side of things, and you see a lot of that in the HOn3. Although
right.
And in no way is this to. In fact, I'm a big fan of HOn3. If I had the bandwidth, I'd do that too. Where it's not a specific prototype typically, or they're loosely based on prototypes, but maybe a little more whimsical. And then you have sort of the ultra realistic, count every rivet, make sure that all the brake rigging is correct. And by the way, that's one of my fetishes is making sure all the brake rigging is correct on all of my cars. And there's that lane. So I think narrow gauge railroading actually can appeal to two very different personalities.
Right. Or skating rinks or Ferris wheels.
Yeah, and I think, narrow gauge railroading, two people kind of made it to where it was open for that whimsical freelance. One was John Allen with his Devil's Gulch and Hellengone, and then shortly thereafter was Malcolm Furlow. And our modern day equivalent would be Dave Meek, who's doing the Thunder Mesa, who I'm a huge fan of Dave Meek, who, by the way, is now doing an HOn3 project that I'm super stoked about.
Are you talking about the Route 66 one?
Yeah, well, he's doing the Route 66 thing, but he's also doing a Colorado HOn3 layout.
Yes.
Yep,
I love his work. Yep. His work is just awesome.
The Thunder Mesa, that's it. The Thunder Mesa layout is just phenomenal. It's whimsical, but it's not over the top whimsical. It's just enough to really be fun while still being in the plausible category.
Yeah, there's no dinosaurs on it, and I find it really interesting that he got going fast because he had to move from Jerome down the hill to Clarksdale.
Yes, he did. I followed that. Yeah, I mean, he's one of those channels where I'm always looking to see did he drop a new video? So yeah, good stuff. So I think in that respect, I think narrow gauge does appeal to both somebody who's super creative at heart, full of imagination, and then people who are kind of more like me, more pedantic and I really need to make sure that, I that car wasn't on the road by 1947, that I didn't have it on my layout either, kind of thing.
Well, there's nothing wrong with that. One of the interesting things I find is people who get into let's just say N scale, HO or O scale, they just build layouts and they, build them the way they think they should be built. But you can't do that with a focused, prototypically accurate narrow gauge railroad. I mean, you can't make it look goofy. Maybe people have, but I've never seen them. They always look really good, whether it's, like you said, ore hauling or cattle or logging.
Yeah, and I will say, I think in the narrow gauge community writ large, and this is going to be, maybe a little hypocritical of me, but I think the Colorado narrow gauge is overrepresented.
Oh, yeah, you mean like somebody doing Tehachapi?
Well, no, I mean, all but 6 of the 50 states in our union had a narrow gauge railroad, well, at least one narrow gauge railroad, right? There were multiple narrow gauge railroads in Pennsylvania besides the East Broad Top. There was the Eastern Tennessee and Western North Carolina. There was, and there's, I think the Colorado narrow gauge is so well represented because that's what the manufacturers produce, right? That's where Blackstone focused solely on the Denver and Rio Grande. When they built the East Broad Top hopper, people didn't buy it. So, it's partly because of what's available, but I think it's partly because we model what we see, right? And, in the 80s, there was just a slew of great HOn3 stuff, including, of course, Malcolm Furlow's San Juan Central. But I think, we miss out when we just focus on, and we think about the narrow gauge, we think about Colorado. Yeah, it's awesome. And Colorado probably had more narrow gauge miles than any other state. But, there's a lot of other opportunities out there I think people missed. Case in point, Chris Schmuck, modeling the Mans Creek, which I think ran in West Virginia. Was it West Virginia? But like the West Virginia-Ohio border. Just really obscure stuff, but just really, really neat. And I think we miss out on that sometimes.
So the community and inspiration, who has influenced your modeling the most? Maybe we kind of just touched on it, but we can hit it again.
So this was the one question I didn't really prepare well for because I don't have a great answer for it. My inspiration kind of changes, as I go along. I've been inspired, like when I was modeling Pensy, I was inspired by Doug Nelson. I was inspired by Neil Shore, who models the middle division in O-scale 3-rail.
Right.
So, crazy things like that. Right now in my HOn3 work, I would have to throw out Jeff Reynolds and Chris Symington as inspirations, but I'm not being all inclusive here. Writ large, just in general, for as good modelers. On the weathering side, of course, we all have to pay respects to Tom Mann. On the just on layout philosophy, my good friend Ed Kapuscinski, who's already gotten a couple of props. There's just
who is that man? Oh, the GOAT, the Godfather.
Yeah, he's one of the youngest among us in the Railwire herd, and yet he's probably one of the most influential. And I remember when we were talking about the Railwire before we kind of got started, and I think I joined in about 2007, and I think it was Lee Weldon also who found me. And Lee's another person who's inspired me quite a bit. And I remember it felt like, because at that time the rail wire was invitation only, and it was like getting called up to the majors. And I'm like, are you sure I can hang with you guys? And I'll tell you, so the rail wire crew writ large has been hugely influential in pushing me past my comfort zone, pushing me to do things that I wouldn't have done otherwise, and inspiring me with just amazing modeling week in and week out.
Yes, and if you put something up that looks stupid, they tell you it's great. I love it, and I've talked about it on these podcasts over the last year, and I've been a pimp for rail wire and telling people to, go look at it. It's not your typical forum.
Yeah, I think we've come a long way, though. I don't think it's. I mean, I think it's constructive, but it's also, it's also not, the guaranteed attaboy where it's like, oh look, I glued kitty litter to a piece of track and where are my attaboys? And you're not going to get that on the rail wire. But at the same time, I think you're going to get a lot of very thoughtful discussion, a lot of very constructive criticism, like, hey, have you thought about doing it this way? Or, in my research, the prototype actually did it the other way. That's the kind of feedback that you get. And that's the sort of thing I thrive off of. And it's been hugely helpful for me. The other place I get a lot of inspiration, believe it or not, and we'll all love to hate Facebook, but there's some great modeling groups out there.
Yes.
And
yes.
So John Coker, very famous railroad artist and also a former locomotive engineer on the Cumberson Toltec, runs a Rio Grande Southern specific page out there on Facebook. And that is my continuing source of very road specific inspiration. And the modelers on that page, I kind of feel like I'm a poser when I share my stuff compared to some of the stuff I see on that page. So that's a great place to go. And the knowledge depth there, if there's a question I can't answer with, the 24, Rio Grande Southern books I've got, these guys know the answer.
All right, let's talk about some of your future plans and expansion ideas. I know you're working on another layout that got you back into N-scale, right?
Yeah. I didn't pitch up any photos of it yet because nothing's really worth looking at.
I'll grab them. It's awesome. Come on.
Yeah, so T-Track, we had a discussion on the rail wire, speaking of segue, regarding what would keep somebody from building a T-Track module. And I had all kinds of excuses in there because, my N-scale modeling right now is primarily the Colorado Midland, which was, a single track.
Didn't you start that a few years ago?
Yeah. I started I started the Colorado Midland first version back in 2013, 14.
That's right.
And then the second version, I built it during COVID. The T-Track thing is sort of on the horizon, but the N-scale, Colorado Midland was a way to keep me kind of with one foot in the N-scale community because I had actually tried to scratch my narrow gauge itch when I first moved out here with the Colorado Midland in a small little layout, and I was repurposed N-scale layout that I had built for my son who had lost interest.
Mine did too. I had my son fired up when he was younger.
So the layout that I started with had been CSX in North Carolina, and when it was all done, it was the Colorado Midland in 1905. But then basically, I was not really happy with the track layout or the track, and there were some other reasons. So I started version 2.0 in, I think it was 2020, 2021. It was during COVID. It was a period of time I was working from home, so it was very, very easy for me to tackle that. And so that layout's kind of done, and it's kind of run its course. It's just two simple loops. It's a great show layout. It's kind of a hassle to carry up the stairs, but if I can take it to a train show locally, it usually seems to play well at the shows. But otherwise, I kind of milked that cow for all she was worth.
So what keeps you passionate about the hobby after all these years?
That's a great question, and I'll be honest. I'm just coming off of probably one of the longest sort of hobby doldrums I'd been in a very long time. Layout was done, but I'm too chicken to tear it down and start again. There was nothing really pressing that I needed to do. I had other things going on, lots of life changes, kids going off to college, changing jobs. And I just didn't have any inspiration. And I'm not entirely sure what kind of re-fired me up in all of this. That's not a word.
No. I know. I just went through 3 months of it this summer.
Yeah, well, for me, I feel like it was at least a year. And I was going down and taking pictures of the layout and sharing them on the rail wire, just kind of sort of forcing myself to stay engaged. And I think just after a while, I kind of it started to stick again. I don't know. It's hard to say. I will say with the layout that's been done for a long, long time, how do I keep that interesting? Well, I always feel like I can do better, right? So like I recently replaced a building that I had already built. It's not going to look that much different to the casual observer, but it's going to look different to me. It's going to be more prototypical. The paint job is correct, the roof is correct, and all that sort of thing. And I just keep refining it. There's going to come a time here in a few years when my wife and I are probably going to move back east, and that layout's going to come down, and I'm going to recycle everything I can, from every tree to every barrel to, every turnout that I can pry out without killing it, and then I'm going to start again.
Yeah, the very valuable lesson I learned from Boomer Diorama is don't glue anything down.
Oh, see, for somebody like me, I was always in the opposite school because, I'm used to taking my layouts to shows or moving when I was in the military with my layouts.
That's true.
Where my layouts are 70% glue. Everything is glued.
Yeah, but you know what? That's all right because you can soften it up with alcohol.
Yeah, a couple bottles of isopropyl alcohol and nothing's glued anymore. Yeah, and we're all high from the fumes.
Yeah, there you go. So, I remember you writing about that in Railwire, talking about moving and stuff and what was going to happen to the layout and whether you're going to sell it in sections, move it in sections.
I was musing about what I should do, and I think I've come to the conclusion that I still want to model the RGS as accurately as I can, and that means, correcting some of the compromises I made in this version.
Well, Dave Vollmer, it's been awesome having you on the first podcast of the fall here on the Las Piedras Railroad, talking to us about your love for Colorado narrow gauge railroading. And not only do you have a love for modeling it, you have a real fan interest in it, too. Before we conclude here, tell us about that as well, too.
Gosh, being fortunate to live here in sort of the capital of narrow gauge country, it's not all that difficult for me to get out and actually ride the real thing and photograph the real thing. And, we just rode the geology train on the Cumberson Toltec just a few weeks ago. And of course, I came back all fired up to work on the layout. So, even here on the Front Range, I'll chase BNSF and UP on the joint line. It doesn't matter. If it's a train, it's on wheels, I'll chase it. I'll try to photograph it. Maybe if I see it enough times, maybe I'll try to model it.
Well, it's been great talking to you. I want to thank you for your military service. How many years?
22 years, 7 months, and I wasn't counting.
Thank you for your service. Most of it,
most of it in the privilege.
Army Air Force, and you are our official staff meteorologist at Railwire. You'll always tell us, what our forecast is going to be. It's a forecast of bumpy track.
Yeah, I was going to say I should find a way to monetize that.
There you go. Well, Dave, thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you down the line.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate the invitation and the opportunity.